Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am here with my first ranking video of 2024. So this year, since I'm tracking all my usage on my palettes, I wanted to make these videos where I rank my palette per month on how they've been used. So this is going to be a ranking out of usage, and how I calculate the usage is I calculate each using an eyeshadow as one. So let's say I reach into a palette and I reach for 5 shades, that would count as 5 uses. So every single shade counts as one use. If I go in for just one eyeshadow, that's one use. If I make a whole look with a palette, obviously that's going to be a higher amount of uses. And that's how I use calculate it. So again, I am tracking my usage in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project for my eyeshadow bank. So that's kind of how I keep in track on how many uses I have on each palette. So I have a palette next to me for all of the palettes that I reached for in the month of January. And I'm going to talk you through how many times I reached for each palette. So before I jump into the palettes themselves, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So first up we have this palette right here, which is my Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. So this is a palette that I've reached for twice in the past month, and the eyeshadow I reached for in here is the same one both times, and that is an eyeshadow that's in my Pandos eyeshadows. So if you know that project, you might know which eyeshadow I'm talking about. I'm not going to point it out in this project just to not give any spoilers. But I did reach for that eyeshadow twice in the month in January at least. I have reached for it more in February, but we're only counting the uses up till the 31st of Jan. So yeah, I reached for this palette twice, not too much, but overall I think it's going to be a palette that I reach for more in autumn. But I'm just happy that I'm getting some use out of that specific shade. The second palette that I have on the list is this one right here, and again it's going to be a spoiler for a project, but if you haven't seen my last video, I would watch that first. But basically this is now my Project Level Up Level 2 palette, and I rolled this one in a couple, I think like a week or maybe like the last week of January. I was working on this one. I did pre-film the video a little bit because I did hit my level 1 goal early, so I did pre-film this one like a week and a half, I believe. So I reached for this one in the last week of January. But this one is one that I have reached for 8 times, and the palette now looks like this, so a little bit of use here and there. I'm not going to show you too much, but yeah, that is the palette now, and the use is quite spread in this one. I'm not going to tell you exactly what I've used, again, not to spoil my Project Level Up too much, but 8 uses so far in the eyeshadows that is in here, so that is the update for my second rank palette. Next up, for ranking number 5, so by the way, we have 7 palettes to talk about that I reached for in January. So place number 5, we have one of my focus palettes for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. So the eyeshadow that comes down at the bottom is the smallest out of the 3 that I was working on in that project, and that is this one right here. So this is the Natasha Denona Mini Nude palette, and this is one that I have reached for quite a lot more than my last palette that I talked about. I actually used this one double as much, so I've reached for this one 16 times. And this is what the palette looks like. You can see I have some dips in some of the eyeshadows, and this was actually brand new when I started using it in that project. But yeah, 16 uses in this palette. I know I have reached for the middle shade, I think 5 times. I reached for this transition shade like 4 times maybe, and then like this rest of the use is spread between the others. So it's a really nice and handy palette, but I don't think it's ranking higher because it is such a small palette. Because obviously each time I reach for this palette, the max I can get is 5 uses, even if I reach for every single shade. So that comes in place number 5. For place number 4, we have the palette that I was working on for my Project Level Up Level 1 palette, and that was my Urban Decay Zoned Vibes palette. So this one comes in 4th place, but just barely, because I have 17 uses on this one, so 1 more than my Natasha Denona Mini Nude palette, and this is what the palette looks like now. Obviously I reached for every single shade once in my Project Level Up, and I also hit 1 pan, and that was in the shade Tiger's Eye right here, and I believe that one took like, I can't remember, again since I pre-filmed my Project Level Up video a little bit, I can't remember how many times it took, but maybe 6, something like that. And then the rest of the palettes I used a couple times. I know, for example, I used this one a couple times, so did I with this one. Like some of the like corner shades, like the more staple shades in this palette, I reached for a couple times. So 17 times in total, and this one comes in place number 4. So we have come to my top 3 palettes. and 2 of these are also for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. So yeah, I'm going to talk you through them. In third place, we do have one of those 2 palettes, and that is my Christmas Eve palette from Odin's Eye. Again, I was working on this one in that project, and I reached for this one 19 times. This is what the palette looks like on the inside. I really love this palette. It was such a joy to reach for. I did really fall in love with this one. I understand the hype for this palette. When I was up with those like 3 looks that I did for that video, I didn't want to put the palette down, and I really love this one. It's probably one of my top palettes that I reached for overall, like not usage wise, but like in general ranking this past month, because I really did love it. So with this palette, I reached for every single shade once, and then there was a couple shades that I reached for twice, including Snowflake I reached for twice, I reached for Lemon Tart twice, and I believe the last one I reached for twice is the shade Snow Light. So I believe this one, and this one here is the ones that I reached for 2 times, and then plus that is 16 equals 19 uses in total. So we have 2 more palettes to go, and in second place when it comes to usage, we have the last palette that was included in my project, so my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, and that is the Rose Quartz palette. So this one here I have reached for 24 times. I really love this palette, and I think you all know that. This is a palette that I've talked a lot about on my channel. I really love the kind of pinkier undertones in here, and the kind of, yeah, like romantic, cool tone looks you can get with this palette. So with this one, again, I reached for every single shade, which is 18, and then I know I reached for this shade up here 5 times, so that's another 4 uses, which then equals to 22. And like I said, I reached for this one 22 times in total, so I reached for 2 more shades twice, which I think is Blissful, no wait, sorry, Moon Magic I reached for twice, and I believe Self-Love I also reached for twice, so those 2 as well. But yeah, this palette I really love. Again, I want to reach for this one more this year, but this past month I reached it mainly for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, which is why the usage is so high. So again, that came into second place with 24 uses in total. For my number 1 palette, you might be able to guess which one it is, but I have used this one a whopping 100 times in the month of January, and of course that is my Panda palette. So this is the Anastasia Soft Glam palette, and of course this is my most reachful one. It currently looks like this. It hasn't changed too much since my update, so I'm happy to show this one. But yeah, I reached for this 100 times. Obviously I don't know the breakdown of that. I can't remember that how many times I used for each shade. So I recommend checking out my update if you want to know the exact use, because that update, I think all the uses that I have, all the 100 uses are equated in that video, because I filmed it I believe on the 29th or the 30th of January, but I didn't use this palette afterwards until the 1st of Feb. So all of the 100 uses are calculated into that video. But yeah, this is probably going to be my top ranked palette for most of the month, so it might be a little bit repetitive overall, but it might be nice for you guys to hear how many times I reach for this palette specifically each month. But yeah, of course this one comes into number 1 because it's the palette that I'm trying to finish this year. So 100 uses towards that in month 1 of the year. So those are all of the palettes that I reached for in the month of January. Are you surprised with my ranking? Did you expect anything else to be towards the top? Obviously, again, my Panda palette was going to be at the top, and that was no question about it. But like for ranking number 2, 3, 4, and so on, were you surprised by any of the palettes that I reached for the most? Is there anything that surprised you, anything like that? I mean, obviously, it depends on what I work on in the month. But from the palettes that I have introduced into my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, my Pando's eyeshadows, everything like that, I want you to guess now what palette you believe is going to be my top ranked palette apart from my Panda palette in the month of February. What do you think I'm going to reach for the most? I honestly have no idea yet. I do think my Product Level Up Level 2 palette, the California Coast palette, is probably going to come up there quite high as well, because I need to hit pan on 2 of those shades, and that is Sydney Grey shades, which are notoriously hard to hit pan on, so that's probably going to be quite high up there. But that is it for today. I really hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys!